Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. To gain that understanding, I am mining the intersection of psychology, theology, and philosophy to make you a better writer. This is episode 117, Zettelkasten for treating a philosophical difference. We have been using my book that just came out, Writing with Emotion, and we've been using it for a practical purpose to teach Zettelkasten because it's small enough that you can actually imagine Zettelkasting the whole book if you wanted to, and it's fairly well organized because I come out of a systems and computer software background, and organization is my middle name. So it lends itself well to the type of material that you'd put into a Zettelkasten. And we're also using it as the foundation book for reading syntopically, where you read more than one book, but not necessarily simultaneously. You can read them in succession if you have a Zettelkasten to capture the ideas. So we're beginning, we're going to lay the foundation with Writing with Emotion, and then layer the other books on top of it. Well, we began our study with the section on the taxonomy of the character traits. We counted up the main areas in the book. There's 4 of them. 4 was my next available number, so arbitrarily used that. For A, B, C, D for the 4 sections. And we dove into this one, the taxonomy of the character traits, because it is so obviously hierarchically oriented. Here's the 4 different character trait groups. And then when you dive into the first group, it's broken into subgroups and so on. So that's why we approach D first. But for the philosophical question that came up today in my reading in the Peterson and Seligman book, Character Strengths and Virtues, I need to tie that in. The closest relating card in the Zettelkasten will be to this section 4B, having to do with the character profile diagram. So now I need to add a few cards in that section to tie it in. So here we go. So Zettelkasting my book, Writing with Emotion, and looking at the character profile tool. And we're dealing with the description that you could find on page 4. So here's what it looks like. Here's page 4, and these 4 main sections of the book are described in these 4 paragraphs. So the first card that I made for section 4B was using the information in this paragraph. And the information that I captured there was that the character profile tool enables us to identify, capture, and record a snapshot of our character's emotional profile at any given period in time. Of course, the first time around, we'll start with at the beginning of the story, and later in the book, when we talk about transitions, we'll talk about creating other character profiles as the character makes a transition. And in section 4B, we're just talking about setting up a character profile tool. And we're not going to get very deep into it before we see the philosophical difference that we're going to explore today. So if we dive into page 11, which is where the section begins for the character profile diagram, if you have my book, you'll very quickly see that we're dealing with a diagram in the book for the character profile. The triad of emotions is where we are. That's the page that we're on. Okay, so the point of the image of the triad of emotions, and see that star? That indicates there's something on the back of the card, and on the back of my card, I drew a triangle of the triad of emotions. Of course, mine was very, very primitive. It just said struggle, victory, loss in a triangle. Nothing as fancy as this, but you may recognize this diagram, so I'm putting this one up so you can see what I'm talking about. If you've done anything with my book or my earlier podcast before I started in on the Zettelkasten, you know about the triad of emotions. If not, let me explain it very briefly. Every character trait involves a struggle, and the struggles are what defines the character traits, the specific thing that you're struggling against. Take, for example, something that everyone would know about, for example, moderation. That's a nice one. You want to stay in the center, you want to be balanced, you want to be moderate. And it can sometimes be a struggle to maintain that balance. If you maintain that balance, you obtain the feelings of self-mastery, joy, self-confidence comes out of that. And if you can't manage the struggle, if you fumble and you can't handle it, then you go into a lost state where you might be sad, you might feel depressed, you might feel your world is spinning out of control. A whole host of emotions can come into play in either the victory or the lost state. While you're in the struggle, you're in a very defined and very narrow range because you're working against that one thing that's fighting against moderation. That half-eaten bag of potato chips. You already had half the bag. You don't need any more. But they're calling and calling and calling. And that struggle, no more potato chips. So that is the nature of every character trait involves a struggle. And during the struggle, you have in your mind what it would be like to achieve the victory and what will happen if I lose. But the struggle is where the drama is. And in fact, when you're writing, and this is what you'll learn on page 11 of that book, if you have it, is that all the drama lies in the struggle. And the one choice leads to stability. That's the choice that we'll call victory. It leads to stability. The other choice leads to chaos, and we call that the lost state. Now, one of the interesting things is that if you want to be able to classify and reproduce emotions, you have to understand the struggle, because apart from the struggle, the emotions just spin out of control. The joy state, the victory state of many struggles are similar, just as the lost state of many struggles are similar. They have some differences, but they're squirrely and they're very hard to classify out in the results area. It's at the choice area where everything is well defined. And so all of the character trait groupings are based on the type of struggle that the character is facing. And so that was my card 4B1. 4B was the character profile diagram, and the first topic within the character profile diagram in my book is the triad of emotions. So that's card 4B1. And again, the star just means that there was something on the back of the card. Usually cards, we don't put something on the back, but we can. And if you do, put a star so you know there's something on the back of the card. Then after that, I added a reflection because I felt that it's a really important point to make that a good story arises out of a key decision point, a key decision that your character must make. And the strength of your story will depend in large measure on the degree to which your reader can feel themselves faced with that decision. If you can make your reader ask themselves, what would I choose, and really struggle with it, then you have created an engaging story. It's very important to that story. So because it expanded on 4B1, I gave it the name 4B1A, following the effortless numbering system, which I covered earlier, which simply goes number, letter, dash for readability, number, letter, dash, as far as it needs to go. Okay, now we've come up to the point where I want to add something that came out of the book, Character Strengths and Virtues. And it also needs to go right next to card 4B1, the Triad of Emotions. And we know what to do in that case. We indicate that we have a branch here, and we make a directory card, sometimes called a branch collective, and we just indicate what one of the choices is and what the other, and we arbitrarily name them A and B. And so now let's take a look at the card that made us make that directory. Again, it came from Character Strengths and Virtues, the next main book I've been working with in my syntopical reading. And this card represents an interesting section in the book on page 9 where the authors do a fair amount of soul searching. You see, they really want to have these character strengths. They want to have the virtues, and they want to demonstrate the value in bringing about the good life. They keep referring to the good life, that if you have these character strengths and virtues, you can have the good life. And so this is a quote out of the book from page 9. We hope that the new science of character addresses explicitly what is invigorating about the good life. Okay, so now in my analysis of this, because as you know, whenever you make a main card, you not only include your source, the information you got from the source, the identification of the source, but you should and must include your reaction to what you just read. That is your idea, and that is the thing that needs to be saved in your Zettelkasten. Your idea with respect to what you just read. So for me, I took a look at that and I said, that's rather interesting. This is putting the emphasis on the outcome. In particular, it's putting the emphasis on the victory state. Now, when we look at struggle and character traits, we don't talk about character strengths all the way pegged to one side. We talk about character traits because the story has to be able to go freely from one end of the spectrum to the other, not just over here on the positive. So we know from drama that we have to put our focus on the struggle. Yet I see these psychological researchers, Peterson and Seligman, putting the emphasis on the outcome, the victory state. And that struck me as being a little bit odd. And I know from studying writing that the victory state emotions get very, very squirrely if they don't come out of the struggle. And there's no mention of the struggle in Character Strengths and Virtues. It's all in the success. Everything is in the victory side over here. So then that led to another thought, which to me is philosophical. Now I'm bringing in philosophy. As you recall, I am trying to marry and pull references from psychology and theology and philosophy. And if you look at philosophy and theology, where they agree on this topic, there's a universal agreement between Aristotle and Aquinas, or Aristotle and Augustine, or who else should I bring into this? The concept that the right choice of this struggle must be made without regard to the outcome. If the choice is being made based on outcome and not on principles, then you're operating in the domain of materialism. And so the philosopher and the theologian would caution you that perhaps you're looking in the wrong place for what to govern your decisions on. So that brings in the philosophy and the theology. So I put it in black. This is my thoughts, and this is, as I recall, and without pulling out sources and footnoting. So I brought that perspective in. And then, going a little bit further in the book, they make something that I think is very telling. Another quote from the book. As we have written parts of this book, we sometimes found ourselves sounding like bad evangelists, going on and on about virtue, but convincing no one, even ourselves, that virtue is worth pursuing. Okay, Zettelkasten note. Since this comes out of 4B1B, which came out of the second branch off of Triad of Emotions, we've gone letter, so we put in a dash for readability, and this is 1. So that's the Zettelkasten piece. Now let's look at the concept piece of this. And the concept piece, again, bringing in theology and philosophy, especially the Aristotelian and Aquinas philosophies. If you're advocating for virtue because it's, quote, worth pursuing, virtues because they're worth pursuing, then, and that worth is measured as obtaining the good life, then you're a salesman. You're not an evangelist. To say you're acting as a materialist, make this trade and you will get this payment. That is not a flattering description of an evangelist. And that is probably why they felt they sounded like bad evangelists. And as a writer, if you're taking that kind of a measure, where you take your hero and he's going in and he's getting his courage up to go face the bad guy, and you want to tell him, well, I'll tell you what, you're going to want to get your courage up and face the bad guy because you're going to get rewards and people are going to praise you and you'll probably get the woman and they list all of the good things. You didn't write a very inspirational story. People want to know that your hero is going up against the bad guy for all the right reasons, for all the right purposes. Win or fail, success or fail, knock them down or be knocked down yourself, you are going in to face the villain for the right reasons. And to me, that is the problem. They themselves have identified the problem and they've pointed to the problem, but they haven't been able to think their way through to the solution. And I think the solution is quite simple. As we've talked about in previous days when we've analyzed the syntopical reading with this book in particular, they talked about DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. And they contrasted it to their character strengths and virtues, which is where the outcome is mental health. Well, that might indeed be the case for psychology, where you're saying, I want to bring people out of illness into health. I certainly hope they do, because if you're in a medical situation, you want to bring about health. But when you're specifically talking about virtues, the continuum is not between illness and health, but between virtue and vice. That is your continuum. And the character strengths are over here. I think you can't really discuss the strengths without talking about the opposite. And that's why, in my approach, I don't talk about character strengths. I don't talk about virtues. I talk about character traits, because I need that whole continuum. Because in a good story, You have your villains, you have your good people, you have your hero fighting with the temptation to go bad, or overcoming past badness to go good, or crumbling and going from virtue down to vice. You need that whole continuum to make a good story. And so for me, I have to talk about not character strengths, which just pegs me over to this one side only. I have to talk about the entire perspective, the entire thing of character traits. And that is where we got today. So now you can see how this, to go back to the Zettelkasten here, this was the second thought, the second idea that came out of 4B1B. Now, an interesting question. Should I make a directory card? Should I show 4B1B-1 and 4B1B-2? I certainly could. I'm not going to bother. And the reason I'm not going to bother is because these both relate to the same source. And you could almost have called this 1A instead of calling it -2. I called it -2 because I think it ties more directly to this card on the whole nature of the struggle than it relates to this card, which is specifically talking about a bad evangelist. So I think it's properly called 4B1B-2. And I might just make, just for completeness sake, I should probably go ahead and make a directory card just so that I don't confuse you by not doing that. So I will go ahead offline. I will make a 4B1B directory card, and I'm going to put these cards down here where I'm gathering all of the cards that we have in common that we are building up so that we can talk about principles of Zettelkasten, because we're getting a pretty good number of cards now. We're getting a pretty good collection, and that gives us the ability to talk about more different concepts in constructing a Zettelkasten. And in the meantime, I can stay a little bit focused on my primary interest, which has to do with using the character traits to be able to write with emotion, which is my principal area. Now, I use the Zettelkasten every day, and I'm a total proponent of the Zettelkasten, and so I have no objection whatsoever to doing this series on the Zettelkasten. And I do remind you that I'm gathering them into lilypub.org. Let's see if I can get this up there. I'm going to put them all in an organized fashion in a tutorial section in the Zettelkasten circle on lilypub.org. I'm going to put them in a playlist, but frankly, YouTube gives me very little power to organize my playlist. There's no arbitrary order. There's only oldest to newest or newest to oldest. That's it. That's all you get. So this is where you're going to find them in an organized fashion. It's not free, but it's not very expensive. So I'll see you over in Lilypub, or else post your questions right here, and I will continue this as long as there's interest. Because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to serve. I'm 76 years old. I retired from my job, and I'll tell you another story to go with that, a joke that goes with that. But it's going to have to wait till tomorrow because this is getting a little long right now. Okay, good night. Bye-bye.